Merry Christmas. Good morning, Journey. Merry Christmas in 24 different languages. The world celebrates right now, at least in some way. The world acknowledges something special has happened. What do we actually mean when we say Merry Christmas? It is us declaring, may you have a joyous season of celebrating that Christ has come. You see, in this celebration, we mark the greatest gift ever given to humanity, that God has come near. He has come among us, and with that gift comes life and hope and freedom and reconciliation with Him. We mark that gift with presents, right? And do you ever actually think about what we're doing with these gifts? Like as we give each other these small little tokens, some of them are small, some of them are not. We are modeling the gift that Jesus is for us. And I hope this season, as you do that together, that's actually what you experience. That's what you think about. The grace of God has come. This next 3 weeks, we're going to introduce the good news. We, in fact, are going to mark the announcement from God to the world that this gift has indeed come. We find these three stories in the very first part of the Gospel of Luke. So let's just jump in. Let's go into that. Luke begins in verse 5 of chapter 1, it begins by saying, in the time of King Herod of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah from the division of Abijah. Now, all that means is that Zechariah was a priest of one of the 24 divisions of priests that rotated to serve the temple. It says that he was married to a woman named Elizabeth, who was also a descendant of Aaron. What that means is that she came from the set-apart group of people. You see, Aaron was Moses' brother. He was the first priest of Israel. He came from the tribe of Levi that was set apart from the rest of the other tribes as a holy tribe where the priest would come out of. The picture that Luke is wanting to paint for you is that you've got a priest and a woman from the line of priests who are married. These are special, set apart people. But it does more than that. It speaks to them directly. They're not just special because of the heritage they bring. It says that they were right before God. They were righteous people, obeying all of the laws and the commands of God. They were known to be godly people. Okay. It gives one more description of these guys. It says that they were childless, that Elizabeth herself was barren. Now, that Greek word, I don't usually quote the language. I usually just deal with it and bring it to you. But the Greek word there is stera. Sounds a lot like our word sterile. She was unable to have children. As soon as you hear that, Luke is assuming that some things are firing off in his readers' heads. Because these kinds of stories have been how the people of Israel have moved into their story. Remember the ancient fathers of Israel, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Each one of those had a story where the wife was not able to have children. Abraham was called out from an unbelieving world, given the promises, given a wife, and his wife, Sarah, was unable to have children until God breaks in. They have Isaac. Isaac marries a woman named Rebekah. Rebekah was unable to have children, and God doubles down. He gives her 2 twins. One of them was Jacob, who later became Israel. Jacob married a wife, 2 of them actually. It's a little bit of a story. His wife Rachel was unable to have children until God breaks in. It's not just in the forefathers of Israel. God has done this in the history of the people of Israel. Do you remember the great man Samson? His wife was unable to have children until God breaks in. And you get the judge, the deliverer, Samson. You remember the prophet Samuel. Remember his mom, Hannah, weeping and begging God, promising that if you give me a child, I will dedicate him to you. And God breaks in. The one other little piece to this couple is that they were very old. And so when you hear this, when the readers are hearing this, they're not only going to hear all of the history and the connections of the people of Israel, but they're going to go all the way back to Abraham and Sarah, this old couple that God moved in and said, I will do what you cannot do. Do not make a mistake about this. What is about to happen is by my doing, not yours. Luke is assuming when you hear of this old couple who is barren, who cannot have children, that those stories are coming out. Now, Israel had a command. They had a daily routine of burning incense in the temple. The command came from Exodus chapter 30, and here's the deal. They would have a priest come in and light incense in the morning, and then come in again and light incense at twilight, at the start of the evening, as a marker and a reminder that God is present, that this is His place, and it is His worship that we're enacting. And the way that they did this, I've already told you there were 24 different divisions of priests that totaled an estimation of about 18,000 priests in all. This season was the time that Abijah, the line of Abijah, served the temple. So each division served only 2 weeks out of the year. All of the priests served on the special days, the days like Passover. So in order to define who was going to go in and serve the temple on this day, out of the division of Abijah, they would cast lots. And the way that went was, God, you tell us, you pick who you want to go. And the lot fell on Zechariah. Again, make no mistake, this was no accident. God is moving intentionally at this time with this person. So much so that because of the large number of priests, this was most likely a once-in-a-lifetime event for a priest to enter to do these things. One of 18,000 selected. And so Zechariah goes into the temple. And he goes toward the altar of incense. And when he gets to the altar, he looks up, and on the right side of the altar is this dude that is not supposed to be there. Zechariah loses his mind a little bit. It says that he was overcome, he was gripped with fear. Well, of course he was. This wasn't just some dude. This was an angel of the Lord. And here's what he says. He says in Luke chapter 1, verse 13, "Don't be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to call him John." Now, this greeting from the angel is the most common greeting that you will ever experience in Scripture. Most of the time, when an angel shows up to someone, it is not expected. This is not normal. And it elicits a pee your pants response. Like, nearly every time you're going to see the angel show up and say, "Hey, dude, it's okay. Don't, chill out. I have a message for you." And so what's his message? "Hey, old dude, you're going to have a kid. You're going to call him John." Okay, of course Zechariah is going to be terrified. Angels were part of Israel's story. It would have been part of Zechariah's experience as a priest coming in. The very first time that we see angels in our biblical narrative is in the very beginning. In Genesis chapter 3, we see cherubim, these celestial beings, placed by the tree of life with a flaming sword so that we, humans, won't reach out and eat of the tree of life and live forever in this broken world. Israel was told to create a symbolic representation of these beings and put them on the top of the Ark of the Covenant that resided in the temple. These cherubim were woven into the curtains of the temple itself. They were actually carved into the walls of the temple. Now imagine Zechariah entering into the temple, probably for the first and only time in his life, getting to do this thing, and he walks down the corridors and he sees these carvings in the walls, and he sees the curtains, and he goes to do his duty at the altar of incense, and he turns and there it is. I would have to change my shorts. Angels also, in different form, appeared to Abraham, his maidservant Hagar, Abraham's grandson Jacob, a warning to a guy named Balaam. Go read that story. It's hilarious. They rebuked the judges. They rebuked Israel in the book of Judges. They strengthened Elijah. And they preserved the life of Daniel. Angels always had two responsibilities. Number one, to perform the work of God, and then number two, to proclaim the message of God. That is what the word angel means. It means messenger of God. And so what was his message? Yes, old dude, you're going to have a son. You're going to call him John, but it's more than that. Listen to verse 14. He will be a joy and a delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth. He will be great in the sight of the Lord. He will never take wine or other fermented drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before he is born. And he will bring back many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God. Two things about his message. Number one, he will elicit joy. And number two, he is set apart and empowered by God to do his work. He's set apart. You hear that? Like he's going to live a little differently than everyone. Like he's not going to drink alcohol. He's going to be empowered with the very presence of God even before he's born. But what's this joy thing? Like, of course, Zechariah is going to respond with joy. I'm this old man that thought I was never going to have kids, and I now get to have a kid. Like, there's nothing more joyful as a parent that, right? But why? Why joy for everyone else? Why isn't this just a special joy thing for Zechariah? Well, did you hear the end of his message? Be joy for many because he will bring back many of the people of Israel to the Lord, their God. It will elicit joy because people will come home to their Father. And then he finishes the message with this. Verse 17. And he will go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, and to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. Journey, this story just got better. If you can get better than what we just experienced, it just tripled. Your son, Zechariah, is going to bring all of this with the spirit and power of Elijah. Oh, let me tell you about Elijah for a second. Like, to hear this story, you gotta know the framework, the tapestry that's being woven into this story. Elijah was a dude. Elijah was a prophet of God that reigned during the divided kingdoms where there was Israel and Judah. He reigned. He didn't reign. He prophesied. He came around the 9th century BC during the time of King Ahab of Israel. Now, we hear of Elijah in 1 Kings chapter 17 through 20 and 2 Kings 1 through 2. And in 1 Kings chapter 16, the king Ahab, who is reigning when Elijah is serving, is said of this. In verse 16, verse 30, or chapter 16, verse 30, he says, Ahab did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those who had gone before him. Elijah is raised up as a prophet when Israel was at its worst. King Ahab had turned his back on God and did not function like a king of Israel. And guys, be careful who you marry, because it matters. King Ahab married a daughter of a king of Canaan. Her name was Jezebel. She came from a country that worshiped a god named Baal. Baal was a god of fertility, first of the land, then of animals, but also of human sexuality. And so when they worshiped Baal, well, think full-blown orgy. And also human sacrifice. Like they literally killed babies because babies were a sign of fertility as an offering to Baal. The king of God's people, the king of Israel, is bringing this stuff in during the time of Elijah. And not only that, Jezebel is going out and hunting down the prophets of God to make sure that no one could stand up against her God. Elijah, in the midst of this time, was empowered by God unlike any other prophet before. There are stories about Elijah. Like his whole story is this grand explanation of God moving in incredible ways. Things like him being out in the wilderness and being fed by ravens. Things like him meeting a widow at Zarephath and her preparing her last meal because her oil and her flour are going to go away. And he prays, and that oil and flour don't go away until the famine that God brought is over. Things like that same widow, her son dies, and she blames Elijah for it. And Elijah comes in, prays to God, and guess what? That son comes back to life. God is all over this prophet. Things like him battling with the prophets of Baal and challenging them to call fire down and burn up the altar. They can't do it, even while they're cutting themselves. He calls down fire from heaven from God, burns that stuff up, and then they go get those prophets. Man of God's Spirit and of power. He was asked to anoint Jehu to replace the evil king. He was asked to anoint his predecessor, or not his predecessor, his successor. Thank you. Why do I need fancy words? I can just talk, right? Elisha, to come after him because the work wasn't going to be done when he's gone. Things like him coming to the Jordan River, and see if this creates a memory for you. Remember Israel escaping Egypt? He rolls up his coat, strikes the Jordan River, and it parts, and he walks across on dry ground. Things like his successor, Elijah, asking God to give him a double portion of Elijah's spirit so that he can do that work. And then, maybe the most grand of all, at the end of Elijah's life, when he leaves, he don't die. Like there is a flaming chariot of horses on fire or horses of fire, and a chariot on fire that comes down, swoops him up, and takes him into heaven in a whirlwind. Like, this dude was a dude. But there's more than that. It gets even better. Because by the time that Zechariah is now serving in the temple, there was this expectation of Elijah to come again. So here's the deal. The crescendo festival, the most prominent festival of Israel is the Passover. And at that Passover that they celebrate once a year, they remember and celebrate the deliverance of God from bondage in Egypt. And in that, they celebrate the promises of God. When God shows up to Moses and tells Moses to bring the people out of slavery, God does that with some promises. Let me show them to you. In Exodus chapter 6, he says, I will bring you out of the yoke of Egypt, promise 1. I will free you from being slaves to them, promise 2. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment, promise 3. And I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God, promise 4. So when they celebrated the fact that God did that, they poured a cup of remembrance for each of those promises. And they told the story in narrative form. The children would ask questions, and they would answer these questions based off of these promises. But you know the story, right? Things like King Ahab occurred. The people of God rebelled against God, and their nation ultimately was destroyed. First, Israel was taken into captivity by Assyria, and then Judah was taken into captivity by Babylon. While they're in captivity, they cry out to God to remember his faithfulness, to remember and to once again restore them. Well, there's a fifth promise given to Moses, and it was about the land that was to come. I will bring you to the land I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So while they're in exile, they start pouring a fifth cup and setting it aside because they weren't in their land. They were waiting for things to be restored. And they began to wait, not just for a Messiah, but for one to come before the Messiah. They began to wait for Elijah to come again. Look at the prophet Malachi. It says, see, this happens during the exile. See, I will send you the prophet Elijah before the great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the hearts of the children to their parents. Or else I will come and strike the land with total destruction. Did you see verse 6? He will turn the hearts of the parents to their children. That is an exact quote of what the angel is telling Zechariah when he says, your son will come, his name will be John, and he will live in the spirit and power of Elijah. And he will turn the hearts of the parents to their children. So Israel would pour a fifth cup and wait for the coming of Elijah. And the angel telling Zechariah, that's going to be your kid. Imagine how overwhelmed you would be. Imagine going into the temple in a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Imagine seeing an angel. Imagine hearing in your old age you're going to have a son. And now imagine that your son's going to be that guy. Zechariah's response is like, how do I know? How can I trust this? Really, Zechariah? But you can't fault him, can you? And his response is, I am Gabriel. The story just got even better. If it could get any better, it just did. Gabriel is one of two angels that are named in the scriptures. Gabriel is an angel that shows up while in exile to Daniel, another prophet, to tell him that there is going to be a day when God comes and brings his deliverance. Gabriel is the one who proclaims the good news of God, and Gabriel has just shown up before Zechariah. And Gabriel says, I stand in the presence of God, and I was sent to give you this message. But because you didn't believe in my words, you will have no words. And it's this beautiful combination of punishment and confirmation that God is here in Zechariah's flesh. So Zechariah finishes his stuff, finishes his service in the temple. He goes home to Elizabeth, and that old lady gets pregnant. And her response is this: the Lord has done this to me. In these days, he has shown his favor and taken away my disgrace from among the people. It's as if Elizabeth speaks for the entire nation. The Lord has done this for me. He's taken away our disgrace. Merry Christmas indeed.